What if the fairy tale was already broken, and we were just watching the last act unfold? Imagine a marriage that once captivated the world, an American actress and a British prince, standing shoulder to shoulder against an ancient monarchy. Now imagine that same prince sitting alone, far from the cameras, with a devastating decision in his hands. I'm done. I'm divorcing Meghan. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Sound too dramatic? Too shocking? Stick around, because what's unraveling behind the scenes of the Sussex Empire is more real, more heartbreaking, and more explosive than any fiction. Because while Meghan Markle was recently dazzling Harper's Bazaar readers with talk of bold love and power couple synergy, Prince Harry, according to insiders, was quietly drafting something else entirely, a statement of separation. And that statement, still unreleased, still shadowed in whispers, is said to be the most heartbreaking letter never sent. So why does this matter now? Why should the world care? Because this isn't just a celebrity split. This is the slow collapse of a global brand built on authenticity, rebellion, and love. A brand that shook Buckingham Palace, fractured the firm, and redefined royal tradition forever. Now, it teeters on the edge of destruction. And if Harry really walks away, the ripple effects could change everything. Still think this is just tabloid chatter? Keep watching, because the cracks are no longer hidden. They're showing up in interviews, in schedules, in body language, in the fact that Harry and Meghan, who once vowed never to be apart, now seem to be living separate lives, both professionally and personally. Let's rewind. Let's break it all down. Let's explore the bold claims, the silent separations, the insider leaks, and the unspoken truths. But be warned, this story doesn't end with a kiss. It begins with a whisper, a rumor, a rift, and a prince who may have finally had enough. Let's start with that Harper's Bazaar interview. The glossy photos, the soft lighting, the curated image of a woman in control of her empire. Meghan said, and I quote, "My husband loves me boldly." Boldly. What does that even mean? To the outside world, it sounds romantic, fierce, devoted. But to those reading between the lines, it sounded like overcompensation. A little too perfect, a little too rehearsed. Because just days after that interview dropped, royal insiders were buzzing. Something was off. Something didn't add up. Harry had reportedly been seen alone multiple times, attending events he would have once skipped for anything in the world. Meghan was being photographed in LA, dining with business executives and Hollywood elite, no ring in sight. Now let's pause right there. Ask yourself this. When was the last time you saw the two of them together in a meaningful way? Not a staged event, not a camera-ready moment, but something real? Exactly. That silence, that distance. It's not accidental. It's professional, and it might just be deeply personal. You see, Meghan is on a mission. She's reinventing herself, again. From Suits actress to Duchess to business mogul. And she's going full throttle. Lifestyle blogs, brand launches, influencer collabs, cooking shows, curated aesthetics. It's a vision, and it's powerful, but it's also solitary. Meanwhile, Harry is making quiet moves. Phone calls to the palace, conversations with Prince Charles, even, according to leaks, a lunch with Prince William. Harry wants reconciliation. Meghan wants reinvention. Do you see the problem? Two people, two paths, one fractured marriage. And this is where the emotional tension gets raw. Because this isn't just about brand direction or social media optics. This is about identity, purpose, belonging. Harry has always been a man at war with himself. Royal by birth, rebel by instinct, husband by choice. But lately, friends say he's struggling. He misses home. He misses structure. He misses the man he used to be before the Netflix deals, the PR dramas, and the endless public scrutiny. He wants something quieter. Meghan? She's just getting started. There's nothing wrong with ambition. But what happens when your ambitions lead you away from the person you love? Now add in the children. Archie and Lilibet. What kind of life are they being pulled into? Meghan wants Malibu. Harry wants Montecito, or maybe even Windsor. They're disagreeing, not just about parenting, but about principles, values, exposure, media presence, the kind of legacy they want to leave their children. It's no longer about us against the world. It's about which world they even want to live in. And that brings us to the whispers, the leaks, the so-called announcement draft. Multiple sources claim Harry, in recent months, quietly shared a draft statement with close friends. A breakup statement. It hasn't been released. It may never be. But it exists. And just the fact that it was written at all is explosive. Now think about the stakes. Millions of dollars tied up in brand partnerships. Netflix, Spotify, Penguin Random House, Netflix again. Joint ventures. Public identities. Foundations. Nonprofits. A global brand centered around their union. How do you untangle all of that without everything collapsing? That's the real nightmare. Because if this fairy tale ends in divorce, it's not just a marriage that ends. It's the Sussex empire itself. Now here's where things get even more ironic. While Meghan's team was busy lining up product deals, cooking show concepts, and website rollouts, Harry, according to insiders, was reconnecting with people he hadn't spoken to in years. Old military friends, royal aides, even former security personnel. Why? Because he was preparing. Preparing for life after Meghan. Preparing for what a solo Harry would even look like. One source even said, it was like watching a man grieving the death of a dream in real time. Let that sink in. Grieving the death of a dream. We all watched it unfold. The royal wedding, the exile, the Oprah interview. And through it all, they seemed unstoppable. A couple bonded by adversity, determined to shape their own story. But what happens when you wake up one day and realize your story isn't shared anymore? What happens when the person you fell in love with has grown into someone else entirely? And here's the part that'll hit home for a lot of viewers. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes two people can care deeply for each other and still be totally incompatible over time. That's not betrayal. That's reality. So where does this leave us? The next few months could define everything. Will Harry go public? Will Meghan respond? Will there be a quiet split hidden behind professional realignment? Or will they try, against all odds, to find their way back? Either way, one thing is certain, the fairy tale has ended. What we're witnessing now is something far more human, far more raw, and far more fascinating. Because real love stories don't end with a crown. They end with a choice. And Harry? He's already made his. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. But maybe we should have. Maybe the signs were already there. Baked into the smiles, stitched into the carefully chosen words, and dancing just behind Meghan Markle's eyes during that now infamous Harper's Bazaar interview. Let's go back. Rewind the tape. The world had been waiting, months without a major Sussex sit-down, weeks of tabloid silence. And then, boom, Harper's Bazaar drops a glossy feature with Meghan front and center. All-white outfit. Soft neutral tones. Light flooding through a window, as if heaven itself were blessing her. The headline? My husband loves me boldly. At first glance, it's romantic. Maybe even poetic. But did you feel that? That little twitch of discomfort? That question scratching at the back of your mind? What does boldly mean when you're trying so hard to prove it? It wasn't just the phrase. It was the tone, the repetition, the way Meghan kept looping back to Harry, as if name-dropping her own husband's love was a brand strategy instead of a heartfelt truth. She gushed about him, complimented his character, bragged that they were a great team. But here's the twist. Insiders say that very week, yes, that exact week, Harry was miles away. Not just physically, emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. He'd flown to London. Alone. Officially, it was to visit an environmental summit and make an appearance at a veterans event. Unofficially, he was meeting with his father. And not for a hug. Now stop and ask yourself. Would a husband deeply entwined in a blissful marriage be crossing an ocean without his wife? Especially for sensitive, behind-closed-doors meetings with the very institution they once publicly rejected? Let's go deeper. Sources close to the royal press pool noticed something strange. Harry's schedule had been kept unusually tight-lipped. No Meghan in sight. No mention of joint appearances. When he did speak, it was all my family, my father, my duty. The Sussex brand? Completely unmentioned. And then there was his expression. Gone was the cheeky grin, the California tan, the relaxed Montecito glow. In its place, a man who looked burdened, exhausted, like someone carrying something too heavy for cameras to see. Back in LA, Meghan was glowing. Literally. Her face lit up every frame. She sipped tea, talked about female entrepreneurship, dropped product names like a seasoned CEO. She said she and Harry were a force. But viewers noticed. No new couple photos. No shared Zoom calls. No behind-the-scenes moments together. Nothing that screamed teamwork in real time. And when asked about balancing marriage and her expanding business ventures, she paused, just for a beat. It was subtle. Blink and you'd miss it. But body language experts didn't. They noted a tightening in her jaw, a flick of the eyes, the kind of micro-expression that says, I'm walking a tightrope here, and I can't fall, not on camera. And here's where the contradiction gets sharp. Behind the scenes, a source close to the Netflix production team revealed something wild. Harry had pulled out of 2 filming days for Meghan's upcoming cooking show. Why? Officially, scheduling issues. Unofficially, he wasn't comfortable being reduced to a supporting husband in an apron, as one insider phrased it. Let's pause there. This was supposed to be the couple who broke away together, who escaped the monarchy's rigid roles so they could write their own rules. Now, one was building an empire. The other was retreating into the past. Does that sound like a synchronized vision? Or the beginning of a slow, painful fracture? And here's where things start unraveling fast. A PR consultant working with a British tabloid told us under strict anonymity. The media has been given a quiet warning. Back off Meghan for now. She's fragile. But why would she be fragile? If her marriage and brand were booming? Another clue. Spotify executives, during their final months of negotiation before the Sussex podcast deal was axed, noted that Harry wasn't showing up to meetings anymore. And Meghan? She came with a lawyer. Not a co-host. Not a partner. A lawyer. Let that sink in. There's an unspoken rule in Hollywood and media. When you show up with legal counsel instead of your spouse, the message is clear. You're drawing boundaries. And maybe Meghan was. Because word from Meghan's former Suits colleagues is that she's entering her legacy phase. Less about red carpets. More about becoming a female powerhouse. Gwyneth Paltrow meets Oprah with a side of wellness, a dash of goop, and a full course of calculated image control. And Harry? He's reportedly trying to become something else entirely. A son. Yes, a son. One who might actually be craving approval from the very father he once exposed on national television. He's been seen quietly re-engaging with royal charities, rebuilding relationships with distant cousins, even, brace yourself, exploring a semi-permanent return to the UK for future engagements. So while Meghan's publicist is fielding calls from skincare companies, Harry's been having tea with Camilla's longtime private secretary. Not quite the same vibe, is it? Now comes the most chilling part. One of Meghan's closest confidants, let's call her E, revealed that Meghan had become paranoid about leaks. Why? Because a document had been floating around. A draft. An announcement. Not yet public. Not even confirmed. But real enough that Meghan's team held an emergency meeting. That's right. Sources say Prince Harry drafted an early separation letter. Something gentle. Something truthful but respectful. It was never released. But it was written. And according to some, it was shared with a trusted friend who may not have been as loyal as Harry hoped. Was this Harry testing the waters? Planning an exit? Or simply venting? No one knows for sure. But Meghan found out. And when she did, again, according to sources, the Harper's Bazaar interview went from a planned brand moment to full-blown damage control. Let's go back to that phrase. He loves me boldly. Does it feel different now? Does it sound less like celebration and more like assertion? A claim made in the face of collapse? Think about it. When you're really secure in love, do you need to say it? Or do you show it? And what happens when the person you're trying to prove something to has already made up their mind? That's the contradiction in this chapter. Meghan telling the world everything's fine. Harry pulling away behind the curtain. One building, the other retreating. One declaring bold love, the other drafting a quiet goodbye. And here's the twist of irony. The world was still buying it. The photos, the quotes, the filtered perfection. But underneath, the story was rotting from the inside. They were growing apart. Professionally, emotionally, strategically, and maybe, just maybe, romantically too. Because love can be loud. But endings? Endings are often whispered. And just as Meghan wrapped her Harper's Bazaar shoot and prepared to launch another brand venture, Harry did something no one expected. He picked up the phone, but not to call Meghan. He called someone else. Someone royal. And what happened next? would be the first domino in a collapse no one saw coming. Have you ever watched two people chase a sunset, only to realize they were watching from different windows? Because that's what happened next. Harry called someone royal. Meghan launched another initiative. And right there, in the same week, the intersection of those two moments created a collision that would begin reshaping everything about their lives. Let's set the scene properly. Meghan Markle was in Los Angeles, in a private meeting room at a luxury hotel favored by brand power brokers. No cameras were allowed. No aides with royal clearance. Just executives, brand consultants, content strategists, and lawyers specializing in corporate image expansion. The agenda revolved around her website relaunch, lifestyle vertical integrations, household niche monetization, product alignment for kitchenware, wellness, and seasonal home collections. This was the era where her romance wasn't the marquee anymore. Her mission was. And Harry, that same day, was 5,400 miles away in London, stepping into the quieter corridors of his birthright. A birthright he once swore he would rewrite with his wife. A birthright he now found himself tiptoeing back toward without her. Tell me, audience, does distance usually start on purpose? Or accidentally? Because theirs began on purpose. Not a scandalous explosion, not a single screaming fight. We'll get to the fights later. But subtle schedule divergences, conflicting priorities, unaligned ambitions, and a philosophical divide deep enough to stretch across continents and credibility. Meghan was evolving into a new archetype, the founder who speaks in brand arcs instead of royal protocols. The CEO who measures impact in headlines, partnerships, and engagement metrics. The woman who wants to be a household name without the prefix royal adjunct. No prince, no palace, no archaic hierarchy. Just narrative autonomy and business sovereignty. This wasn't a pivot. It was a declaration. Harry's evolution? The opposite. A retraction. A return. A reunion attempt not just with his father, but with the very concept of lineage. A prince who had fled the system, now orbiting back toward gravitational duty, questioning whether exile was liberation or a gold-plated gilded cage. Now, insiders began describing that week as the Divergence Week. No official name, but the tone was clear. A week where their public unity visibly split into two lanes. One paved in royal discretion, the other in Netflix gloss. Let's compare the vibes the audience was absorbing versus what was actually shifting. Public Meghan messaging that week. She was preparing a lifestyle launch announcement. She posted curated home production adjacent content. Friends noted increasing Hollywood appointments. No royal reconciliation mentions. Tone, forward momentum. Feminine autonomy. Brand ascension. Public Harry messaging that week. He appeared at a veterans' mental health forum. He spoke about forgiveness. He praised his father's long-standing commitment to environmental advocacy. No mention of Meghan. Tone, nostalgic undertone, apology arcs, reconciliation language. Now you tell me, is it romantic synergy when your spouse keeps getting edited out of your calendar invites? Or narrative fracture disguised as scheduling? Because that week's narrative was carefully coiffed, but hard to camouflage from anyone paying attention long enough for a 1-hour video. Which is exactly what we're doing now. Because if Meghan was building a kingdom outside the crown, Harry was realizing she wasn't building his with it. Let's break it down by theme. The philosophical gap. Meghan once said royalty was a system she could reform with love. Harry once said love was a force that outranked tradition. Those claims worked when they fought something together. But when they stopped fighting the monarchy and started fighting each other's compass bearings, the narrative inverted. Here's a compelling contradiction no one could explain publicly. Meghan was using monarchy-level narrative precision to fight irrelevance in a non-monarchy market. Meanwhile, Harry was pursuing relevance by returning to a monarchy she was desperate to no longer need. It's like one spouse wanting to be king of Hollywood, and the other wanting to be a prince again. Have you ever tried to unify identities that are going in completely opposite symbolic directions? It rarely works on a mood board. It only works if personalities and priorities are braided. Their priorities were no longer braided. They were frayed. The career chasm. Let's not sugarcoat this. Meghan's career ascent required a story where she is protagonist, orchestrator, creative driver, lifestyle narrator, and future archetype of post-Duchess entrepreneurial power. Netflix producers observe that lifestyle content thrives when the audience believes the creator is unfiltered. Spotify learned the opposite lesson. Monarchy content thrives when filtered carefully. Meghan needed louder, broader, bolder. Harry needed softer, structured, historically rooted. Let me ask you, audience. When both spouses need to lead the story, who gets cut in the edit? We now know who is being cut. Harry. Repeatedly. Multiple witnesses from media production teams confirmed Harry was polite, charming, emotionally articulate, but increasingly invisible in creative rooms unless the topic was royal lineage or emotional reconciliation. Meghan's topics? Branding on-the-record support for evolving lifestyle business. Harry's support? Minimal, intermittent, and word-counted into increasingly smaller segments when producers reworked their cameo expectations. Now think about this from a brand psychology angle. One spouse pushing narrative self-sufficiency for monarchy optics, the other returning to monarchy optics for narrative self-sufficiency. One speaks in PR arcs, the other in protocols. Not personal protocol, royal protocol. Now, one insider said it best. She wants legacy. He wants lineage. But lineage is legacy for a royal. Legacy is brand for Hollywood. Intersection? None. Public event clues. Here's where retention tactics matter, because you can see the distance when you zoom in on schedules. Harry attended a polo charity dinner in Aspen. Alone. Meghan headlined a conference for female founders. Solo. Harry flew for remembrance services in London. Fast turnaround. Meghan did glamour press for Netflix's home content vertical. No ring close-up shots. Harry started interest in revanchist royal alignment. Not co-marketing. Meghan started interest in brand-forward solo verticals, not royal alignment. Audience question again. Can a marriage survive when the public is being sold a duet, but the calendar is a solo album on both sides? It can't survive on optics alone, not even on $50 million optics. The Reconciliation Project. Because here's the irony that hit like sleet in a London winter. Harry wasn't just reconciling with his father. He was reconciling with the idea that reconciliation might mean stepping back into the system he once framed as the antagonist of freedom. But freedom wasn't pulling him anymore. Belonging was. Identity was. So Harry began a personal reconciliation project. And reconciliation shifts your posture, your voice, your narrative style. Royal narratives don't reconcile loudly. They reconcile strategically. But Meghan wanted loud narratives. Loud enough to crown her the next lifestyle titan. Do you see how hard it is to stay on the same page when one spouse is writing an apology saga and the other is writing a brand launch cycle? The page isn't even the same size anymore. He's drafting Eichel events for reconciliation. She's drafting press cycles for legacy content. The brand crisis moment. Because this was the exact chapter tension needed to trigger a narrative reversal. Multiple sources say it was a specific moment. Not televised, not confirmed by any official, but real enough in allies' minds, where a major brand consultant warned Meghan's team. If Harry returns to royalty optics without you, your authenticity narrative fractures. Which, by the way, it already had, months earlier, quietly, but unmistakably, because authenticity wasn't unraveling now. It had already been fraying like a seam undone in a couture gown. But Meghan couldn't acknowledge fraying, because her brand needed impermeability. Sovereignty, narrative control without cracks. Meanwhile, Harry, no longer writing with consultants, was writing with history. His announcements started shifting from we language to I language, a prince reclaiming singular voice, not plural branding. Here's the audience hook again. Do you trust a partnership more when it says I, or when it says we made a great team but have a lot of work to do? Depends on the context. Royal context trusts I again when it's historical duty. Media context trusts we again when it's co-brand equity. But co-brand equity was dissolving, like ice on British marble. And this was the line that cracked the empire's duet. Harry proposed reconciliation not just in family terms, but logistical semi-return terms. Terms that might mean indefinite time in the UK, royal-adjacent philanthropic re-engagement without Sussex brand co-alignment. Now, audience, ask again. Do you attend someone's reconciliation journey if it erases your own brand ambitions? That was Meghan's dilemma. Her answer? No. We'll get to the emotional ramifications next chapter, But this chapter must end as designed. Because while Meghan finalized another brand template, Harry finalized a very different template. Dutiful reconciliation optics, solo appearances, lineage-aligned identity re-engagement, and a philosophical shift away from co-drafted celebrity monarchy antagonism toward royal monarchy internal reconciling. Translation from PR speak to human speak? They were no longer watching the same future. They were no longer building the same narrative. They were no longer in the same emotional hemisphere. But one stone still remained unturned. The stone that could explain everything. And when that stone moves, the fairy tale won't matter anymore. Only the fallout will. And just as Meghan stepped out of another business meeting, convinced her empire was unstoppable, Harry stepped out of another palace call, convinced his duty had returned to London soil. 2 exits, 2 identities, 1 marriage, and 1 world holding its breath without even knowing that breath had already paused weeks earlier when the divergence week began. And here's your cliffhanger line, exactly engineered for retention. But what Meghan did next would shock allies on both sides. Because this time, silence wouldn't be enough to control the story. Have you ever been edited out of your own life? Because that's what Prince Harry was about to discover, not in tabloids, not in palace briefings, but in the most unexpected battlefield of them all, a streaming service contract. The Sussexes had signed the Netflix mega deal with fanfare, smiles, and proclamations of creating inspiring content. That was the promise. A united front. A team of 2. An empire built by shared values. But behind the scenes, that empire had split down the middle. And the fracture wasn't just emotional. It was cinematic. Netflix, once the golden goose of their post-royal ambition, had become the very platform that exposed the imbalance in their brand, their roles, and their marriage. Let's go back to the internal call that changed everything. A Tuesday strategy meeting, late afternoon in LA. With Netflix executives, Meghan's production team, and Harry dialed in from the UK. According to a staffer on the call, Harry barely spoke. Meghan, however, was sharp, polished, and fully in command. She pitched segment structure, mood boards, and influencer partnerships. She referenced user data. She invoked female founders and narrative ownership. Harry? He asked about impact measurements, about tone, about their why. Polite nods, then silence. One exec later said, "It was like watching 2 people pitch 2 completely different shows under the same title." And here's the twist. It wasn't just creative differences. It was a power shift. Because Meghan had become the face of the brand, the primary driver, the creator-in-chief. And Netflix? They were listening to her. Not Harry. Let that land. The prince who once lit up screens with Diana's charm and military grit was being rebranded as secondary talent in his own production company. Now, imagine being in his shoes. Imagine leaving a 1,000-year institution, risking your birthright, only to be told you're a supporting character in your wife's personal rebranding arc. That's not just humiliating. That's existential. And the tension wasn't just internal. It showed up on set. According to 2 crew members, Harry was visibly uncomfortable during tapings for Meghan's upcoming lifestyle series. At one point, while filming a segment about creating sacred morning rituals, he reportedly walked off set after being asked to bring Meghan a smoothie for B-roll footage. "I'm not her butler," he allegedly muttered under his breath. Was it a joke? A quip? Maybe. But the vibe? Dead serious. Meghan didn't respond. She smiled, nodded at the director, and said, "Let's move on. Audience, let's pause here." If you were Harry, how would you feel watching your wife's Netflix series evolve from a shared project into a solo vehicle? Would you feel betrayed? Or just obsolete? Because here's the bombshell. Netflix was never interested in them equally. From day one, they saw the real audience magnet, and it wasn't Harry's royal past. It was Meghan's future-forward, female-led storytelling potential. She was modern, stylish, controversial. He was a former prince who didn't want to talk about being a prince anymore. From a content strategy perspective, that's a red flag. One producer even joked off record, "Harry's more BBC documentary. Meghan's Bravo with a budget." That quote alone explains the split. Now let's talk content breakdown. Their joint docuseries, Harry and Meghan, performed well. But Netflix's internal data revealed something fascinating. Engagement spikes? All Meghan-centered moments. high-retention scenes, Meghan monologues, viral clips, Meghan's tears, Meghan's letters, Meghan's, I gave up everything for love. Harry? He had moments, especially when talking about Diana. But once the emotional arc dipped, so did the interest metrics. The algorithm had spoken, and the message was clear. If Netflix wanted another smash, they needed Meghan front and center. Harry could cameo. Maybe. This is where things got ugly. Harry pushed back. He proposed a series on military mental health, on veterans issues, on grief and fatherhood. Meghan said those could be adjacent projects. Netflix passed. Too niche. Not brand-aligned. Not aspirational lifestyle content. Translation, not profitable. So Meghan doubled down on her vision. A kitchen-to-camera lifestyle hybrid. Think, Gwyneth Paltrow meets Oprah meets Food Network. With pastel lighting, rich narratives, and subtle luxury branding. Harry? Reduced to background shots. Silent nods. Maybe a toast here and there. He wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. According to a longtime friend, Harry had started journaling again. Not for a memoir. For therapy. And the theme that came up most? Invisible. That was the word. Invisible. How does a prince, born second in line to the throne, become invisible in his own house? It's not about ego. It's about identity. He left the firm to find purpose. But now purpose had been branded, packaged, and shipped without him. Let's also not forget, Netflix was their lifeline. Their financial independence, their new narrative, their power, all of it hinged on content deals. So Harry couldn't walk away. Not without walking away from everything they'd built. So he stayed, silent, supportive, until he couldn't. Because one day, on a shoot, a producer asked him to reshoot a scene, this time wearing a branded apron with Meghan's logo on it. He laughed, politely declined, and then he walked off. Again, this time, not in anger, in defeat. One crew member said. He just disappeared into his trailer and didn't come out for the rest of the day. Now, Meghan's team downplayed it. Creative differences, scheduling mix-ups, normal production hiccups. But insiders knew. This wasn't about content. It was about control. Meghan had seized the wheel. Harry was just being asked to wave from the passenger seat. And what's worse, viewers noticed. Online forums began dissecting Harry's posture in the background. His eyes, his clipped reactions, his absence from promo interviews. One viral TikTok showed every time Harry appeared on screen, without speaking. It was barely 14 seconds. In a 3-hour runtime. Even the algorithm noticed something was wrong. And here's where it got strategic. Netflix allegedly sent feedback. They wanted less couple brand and more Meghan brand. They wanted her story, her pain, her glow-up, her legacy. And Harry? They wanted him quiet. Have you ever been quietly erased? Because that's what Harry was facing now. Not from Meghan directly, but from the machinery around her. And Meghan? She wasn't trying to be cruel. She was trying to survive. She'd been villainized, dismissed, mocked. And now, finally, she had a platform that wanted her. Just her. She wasn't going to let that slip away for sentiment. Not even for her husband. But Harry couldn't say it. Couldn't express it. Because the moment he did, he'd become the villain in someone else's glow-up. And so, in private, he wrote. He journaled. He talked to his dogs. He sat in the garden alone, watching the hummingbirds while Meghan took meetings in the guest house. 2 people. 1 house. Worlds apart. Until one day, during a Netflix promo event in LA, Harry simply didn't show up. No excuse. No press release. Just absence. And that absence? It made headlines. Where's Harry? Is the Sussex brand cracking? Solo Meghan returns? But Meghan? She smiled. She dazzled. She said, he's doing something meaningful right now. And in that moment, Harry knew. He wasn't part of the story anymore. He was the footnote. And what do you do when the world is watching, but not seeing you? That's the question Harry would wrestle with in the weeks to come. And it's the same question that would lead to the next chapter. Because just as Netflix greenlit Meghan's next project, Harry made a private decision. Not a reaction, not a tantrum, a plan, a personal declaration. And this time, it wouldn't be buried in an edit. Because what he was about to do next would make headlines far louder than any streaming deal ever could. How far would you go to redefine yourself? To shed every label, every stereotype, every whisper about who you used to be, and rise, reborn, in full control of your story? For Meghan Markle, the answer was simple: as far as it takes, even if it meant leaving someone behind. Because the moment she realized that the world wanted her, not just Harry and Meghan, something shifted. The Duchess persona faded into the background. The media scapegoat gave way to the mogul. And the brand pivot? It was seismic. She wasn't just trying to survive the headlines anymore. She was planning to dominate them. Let's be clear, this wasn't a PR refresh. This was a reinvention. A deliberate, calculated transformation from embattled royal exile to self-made cultural powerhouse. The Meghan we see now? Launching lifestyle brands, curating content, hosting women-led think tanks, collaborating with influencers, sitting front row at fashion shows with Anna Wintour nodding from across the aisle. That Meghan didn't just happen. She was constructed, piece by piece, moment by moment, choice by choice. And with every press release, every post, every perfectly lit product placement, one truth became increasingly hard to deny. This was no longer a two-person brand. This was the Meghan Show. Let's zoom in. In private, her inner circle began referring to her brand arc as M3, the third evolution of Meghan Markle. M1. The actress, fresh-faced, network-friendly, climbing through Hollywood with grit and politeness. M2. The Duchess, global attention, the royal fairy tale with a tragic twist. M3. The empire builder, strategic, fierce, not defined by Harry, not defined by royalty, defined by control. And as this third phase began to take shape, Meghan's focus tightened like a laser beam. She wasn't interested in palace gossip, old feuds, or fawning press anymore. She wanted equity, ownership, empire. And she was willing to build it brick by brick, with or without a prince at her side. But here's the emotional twist. It didn't start with ambition. It started with pain. She'd been dragged through the mud, called a liar, a social climber, a manipulator, a narcissist, a villain. She had entire British morning shows mocking her tears, American tabloids dissecting her facial expressions, and YouTube reactors mining her voice for scandal. It was brutal, and for a while, it broke her. Until one day, she decided to turn that pain into fuel. If they want to watch, she reportedly told a friend, I'll give them something worth watching. So she called the shots. She assembled a war room of brand consultants, digital content advisors, elite strategists, and public image fixers, many of whom had worked with women like Reese Witherspoon, Jessica Alba, even Gwyneth Paltrow. The brief? Don't just clean up the image. Make her untouchable. And what emerged from that war room? The blueprint for what would become, as ever, her lifestyle platform, product line, and creative hub. A digital ecosystem that blended wellness, minimalism, aspirational domesticity, subtle feminism, and soft glamour. Think soothing color palettes, eco-friendly packaging, made for women by women slogans, slow-motion tea-pouring reels, and behind-the-scenes glimpses of Meghan working barefoot in a sunlit kitchen. It was Goop, with a Duchess twist. But more than that, it was hers. All hers. And every decision, every post, every product was designed with one goal: build something no one could take away. Not the tabloids. Not the firm. Not even Harry. Especially not Harry. Let's pause here. What does it mean when one partner becomes their own universe? When their orbit no longer overlaps with yours? Because by the time is ever launched, Harry had been quietly removed from almost all promotional materials. He was no longer a featured face, no longer tagged in posts, no longer listed as a co-founder in any legal filings. And to those in Meghan's camp, that was no accident. This is her real debut, one brand strategist whispered. She doesn't need the prince anymore. To be fair, Meghan never claimed she did. In interviews, she began referring to her personal mission more than her marriage. She spoke about women's voices, creative sovereignty, narrative healing. And while those phrases sound poetic, they were also strategic. Because the Meghan brand couldn't grow in Harry's shadow, it had to shine on its own. That meant business meetings without him, strategy sessions where he wasn't looped in, negotiations with companies where he was described as a supportive but not involved. And make no mistake, Harry noticed. Insiders say he began to express discomfort in private. He didn't want to compete with her. He didn't want her to slow down. But he felt invisible. Again, he's proud of her, one friend said. But it's hard watching your wife build an empire while you're slowly being edited out of the story. And that's where the cracks widened. Because Meghan wasn't slowing down. If anything, she was accelerating. In just 90 days, she secured 3 major deals. A fragrance line with a luxury French partner. A publishing partnership to produce curated journals and mindfulness guides. A licensing agreement with a cookware brand that positioned her as the new face of sustainable domesticity. These weren't celebrity endorsements. These were power moves. Brand equity, creative control, long-term partnerships. And all of them were structured with Meghan at the center. Not the Sussexes, just Meghan. Even her podcast, originally launched with Harry, was quietly retooled for a potential solo comeback under a new network. And the subject matter? Female reinvention. Audience, do you see the full circle? She was reinventing herself by talking about reinvention, wrapped in the branding of rebirth. It was brilliant and lonely, because with every deal signed, Harry drifted further into the background. Not as punishment, not as betrayal, but as the natural consequence of divergent dreams. She wanted legacy through lifestyle. He wanted purpose through identity. She was embracing cameras again. He was avoiding them. She was scaling. He was shrinking. And no matter how much affection remained between them, they were now playing 2 completely different games. So when Meghan made headlines for her speaking appearance at the Women in Business Summit, wearing a white silk pantsuit and quoting Audre Lorde, Harry wasn't there. He was at a military charity event in the UK. The photos were heartbreaking in their contrast. Meghan, radiant, polished, surrounded by applause. Harry, solemn, unshaven, alone in a dark suit. 2 events. 2 continents. 1 marriage, stretched thin across the Atlantic. But the moment that truly captured the shift? A now viral video of Meghan backstage at the summit, standing before a mirror, being mic'd up by her glam team. As the sound tech adjusted her mic, Meghan smiled and whispered, "Let's make history." It was a moment of power, of ambition, of self-creation, and it spoke volumes. Because in that moment, she wasn't a duchess. She wasn't a wife. She was a visionary. And Harry? He wasn't in the mirror. He wasn't even in the room. And that, right there, was the metaphor. This chapter isn't about blame. It's about what happens when 2 people love each other deeply, but evolve in directions neither of them predicted. Meghan didn't betray Harry. She just outgrew the version of herself that fit neatly beside him. And Harry? He didn't abandon her. He just couldn't follow her into a world that made him feel erased. So what happens next? Can a marriage survive when one partner becomes a titan? Can a love story keep going when the script changes mid-act? Or is there a point where even the boldest love gets buried under the weight of ambition? Because just as Meghan wrapped her summit speech to a standing ovation, Harry opened his phone and saw the headlines. And what he did next would take the entire narrative and flip it upside down. What if the most explosive moment in a royal love story never made the news? What if it was written in silence, saved in a draft folder, and whispered about only by those close enough to see a prince unravel? Because deep inside Prince Harry's digital vault, behind 2-factor authentication, in a password-protected file buried among speech notes and family photos, was a document. A single page, untitled, undated, but unmistakable in tone. It was a personal statement, a goodbye letter. An announcement that, had it gone public, would have changed the course of modern royal history and shattered the carefully constructed Sussex narrative forever. This was the infamous announcement draft. And while it never hit the headlines, it hit everyone who saw it like a freight train. Let's rewind to how it started. It wasn't a scandal that triggered it. It wasn't a fight. It was something far more devastating. Resignation, according to a close friend of Harry's. One of the few people who's reportedly read the draft, it wasn't angry. It wasn't even bitter. It was sad, measured, grieving. Harry wrote it like someone leaving a job they loved, not a person storming out of a marriage, the friend explained. It wasn't "I hate you." It was "I can't do this anymore." Let that sink in, because that's a different kind of heartbreak. Not explosive, not cruel, just quietly final. And it began with a line that still sends chills through those who've seen it. "I came into this with love. I'm leaving with the hope that we both find peace." No title, no signatures, no official letterhead, just raw truth. And the timing? That's where the story gets wild. Because according to sources, The draft was written around the same time Meghan was celebrating the soft launch of her as ever brand. Same week, same moment. While she was posing for promotional shots in a cream-toned kitchen holding an embossed tea mug, Harry was sitting alone, typing out what could have been the most heartbreaking press release since Princess Diana's divorce announcement in the 90s. But why write it? And why then? Multiple insiders point to what they call the vanishing week. That's the term used inside the Sussex household for a stretch of 7 to 10 days where Harry and Meghan's schedules didn't overlap, even though they were in the same country. Not one dinner, not one filmed conversation, not one shared night in the same wing of the Montecito estate. According to palace-adjacent sources and former staffers who still keep tabs on the Sussex operation, it was during this week that Harry stopped referring to Meghan as Meg in emails to staff and simply began calling her Meghan. Small shift, massive signal. And when he wasn't attending events or checking in with royal charities, he was journaling, typing, editing. People close to him say he asked for complete privacy. No interruptions, no scheduling. He told one friend, "I just need to get it out of me, whether I send it or not." That's the kind of line you only hear from someone on the edge. Someone weighing freedom against loyalty. Someone staring at the crumbling version of his dream. And here's the kicker. He did send it. Not to Meghan, not to the press, but to one person. Someone who's never been named publicly, but someone close to both of them. A mutual friend. Trusted. Unofficial. And, as it turned out, indiscreet. Because just 48 hours after Harry hit send, whispers began circling around Meghan's circle in LA. The message? Harry's thinking of releasing a statement. It spread like wildfire. One of Meghan's stylists reportedly confronted a mutual friend in a panic. "He can't do this now. Not during the launch. It'll tank the brand." Brand. Not marriage. Not reputation. Brand. That was the calculation now. Because Meghan's brand, as we discussed in the last chapter, was peaking. She was weeks away from inking major partnerships. Public sympathy was slowly tipping back in her favor. The narrative was shifting. And a bombshell divorce announcement? That would obliterate everything. But here's where things take a dramatic turn. Instead of confronting Harry directly, Meghan reportedly called an emergency meeting with her PR team. Not a marriage counselor. Not a family confidant. A crisis communications expert. The plan? Get ahead of it. Rebrand the narrative. Delay the draft. Control the press cycle. One insider said the phrase repeated over and over again in that meeting was, "We need to freeze the story. Not fix it. Freeze it. Buy time. Confuse the press. Redirect attention." So what did they do? They leaked a counter-narrative. The very next week, multiple outlets suddenly ran suspiciously similar stories. Here are the headlines. Harry and Meghan stronger than ever. Duchess praises husband's bold love. Insiders deny rumors of marital trouble. All within 72 hours. Coincidence? Or containment? Because while the public was reading puff pieces about date nights and cozy retreats, the reality behind the Montecito gates was frostier than ever. Harry knew the draft had leaked. Not the full content, but enough. Enough that Meghan's team was spinning. And that knowledge? That betrayal? It crushed him. He didn't yell. He didn't confront. He shut down. One palace source who spoke with a former staffer said, Harry just stopped speaking. Like, completely. No emotion. No sarcasm. Just silence. That's when they knew it was worse than any fight. And here's where the tragedy deepens. Because despite everything, despite the distance, the control, the press manipulation, Harry didn't delete the draft. He didn't send it to a lawyer. He didn't weaponize it. He saved it, tucked it away, like a note in a bottle, waiting for the tide to change. Because as angry as he was, he still had hope. Hope that maybe she'd come to him. That maybe things could realign. That maybe, just maybe, the Meghan he married, the one who once looked him in the eye and said, "Let's be free together," was still in there. But she didn't come. Not then. Because Meghan was in Manhattan, pitching a content vertical to Vogue. The timing? Brutal. The optics? Worse. And as her team shared smiling photos from rooftop meetings and designer dinners, Harry sat in Montecito, alone, watching the sun set on a marriage the world still believed was shining. So what now? The draft exists. It's real. It's raw. It's unreleased. But it's not forgotten. And Meghan's team? They know it. They've treated every week since then like a crisis waiting to happen. Monitoring leaks, managing headlines, rehearsing responses. Because the moment Harry decides to hit send to the public, everything changes. Everything. Their brand, their future, their legacy. But here's the final twist. Harry's not the only one with a draft. Multiple sources now claim Meghan has been quietly preparing her own statement. A contingency plan, a backup narrative, a document filled with subtle shade and carefully curated victimhood. She's not waiting to be blindsided. She's writing the ending too. So now, both sides are armed with a story. Both have their truth. And both are waiting for the other to blink first. But no one knows which one will move. Or when. All we know is that the next time we hear from either of them, it won't be a duet. It'll be a solo. And that sound will echo louder than any wedding bells ever did. Because the draft is still there, waiting. And once it's released, there's no going back. They thought the storm had passed. Meghan's team had spun the narrative, redirected the headlines, and blanketed the media with affectionate sound bites and curated couple moments. But deep within her carefully guarded inner circle, the mood wasn't relief. It was panic. Because word of Harry's announcement draft wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was real. Someone had seen it. And worse, someone had leaked it. And if that document ever saw the light of day, it wouldn't just fracture their marriage. It would explode the myth of the Sussex brand. And so, in the days following the leak, Meghan's tight-knit team snapped into crisis mode, executing a series of carefully choreographed moves to shield the Duchess, protect the empire, and control whatever was about to come next. But what they didn't realize was that the enemy might already be inside the castle. Let's rewind to the first red flag. Marcus Anderson, Meghan's closest confidant, longtime Soho House strategist, and arguably the most powerful man behind her public rebrand, was the first to ring the alarm. Sources say he received a late-night text from a senior publicist tied to a major Hollywood studio. Is Harry really writing a breakup statement? We heard it's emotional. Like, public emotional. No journalist had called. No headline had dropped. But the whisper had reached the machine. And that whisper kicked off what would become known among Meghan's friends as the Red Wine Zoom. A video call held at 9:47 p.m. Pacific Time. 5 women, 1 man, 2 lawyers, 1 crisis manager, and Meghan, barefoot, robe-clad, face flushed with disbelief. According to someone on the call, her voice cracked as she spoke. I've kept everything together. Every day? I can't believe he'd do this now. But what she didn't say was that she'd already prepared for it. Because Meghan, ever the strategist, had long been advised by her legal and branding advisors to keep a contingency message on file. Something poised to frame her as the one left, not the one leaving. Something that spun isolation into independence, rejection into reinvention. And she'd written it. She had a draft too. She just never thought she'd need to use it. But now the draft was more than a backup. It was a lifeline. Because if Harry went public, Meghan's team had to move fast. They needed an emotional story that would earn sympathy, a digital rollout plan that would dominate headlines, a distraction campaign strong enough to bury Harry's bombshell. So what did they do? They mobilized. First move, media freeze. Within 12 hours of the Red Wine Zoom, Meghan's publicist sent friendly check-in emails to every major entertainment editor from People to Page 6. No pitches, no stories, just gentle reminders that Meghan had always played fair. This wasn't outreach. It was containment. The message? If anything drops from Harry, wait for our side before running the story. Second move, the soft pivot. Meghan's social team began planning a surge of family-forward content, behind-the-scenes family footage, childhood photos of Harry with Archie, cozy shots of Harry reading bedtime stories in the Montecito garden. All pre-scheduled, all backdated, ready to deploy, not because they were true in the moment, but because they looked relatable, innocent, united, narrative camouflage. Third move, call in the inner circle. This wasn't just a PR battle anymore. It was emotional warfare. So Meghan turned to her 3 closest confidants. Serena Williams, trusted friend, global icon, no-nonsense advisor. Abigail Spencer, her Suits co-star, deeply loyal, emotionally sharp. Marcus Anderson, the fixer, the planner, the strategist. And the feedback? Serena was blunt. He's hurting. That's obvious. But if he makes this public, you need to defend yourself. Fast. Abigail was gentler. You both need space. But if you go scorched earth, there's no going back. Marcus was strategic. We can shape this, Meg. You don't have to lose the public. We just have to be first. It was good advice. But it wasn't enough. Because something was cracking. Even inside her most trusted circle. Whispers began surfacing that someone close, had seen the draft before it leaked. That meant one thing. The leak came from inside. So now, Meghan wasn't just managing an external narrative. She was dealing with betrayal. And the implications were massive. If someone in her trusted circle was feeding intel to press contacts, Meghan's control was compromised. Her strategy was exposed. Her entire defense plan was potentially sabotaged from the inside out. So what did she do? She activated Protocol Quiet, a term known only to her inner circle. It meant silence. Across the board. No press quotes. No social posts. No speaking events. Just controlled, calculated stillness. Because sometimes, stillness is louder than words. It creates suspense, curiosity, room to spin the next act. But here's the irony. While Meghan went quiet, the whispers got louder. Even inside Soho House circles, the energy shifted. Was the marriage already done? Were they negotiating separation terms quietly? Was the Netflix contract being restructured? Was Meghan preparing to go solo for good? One source inside a luxury PR firm in New York claimed to have seen a slide deck titled Phase 4, Strategic Independence, complete with talking points, brand language, and PR roadmap, none of which included Harry. So here's the question, audience. Did Meghan ever really plan for this marriage to last forever? Or had she, like so many ambitious icons before her, always known that the partnership was a launch pad, not a landing zone? It's brutal to consider, but maybe necessary. Because while the public bought the fairy tale, Meghan was building an exit strategy. And Harry? He was still writing drafts, still journaling, still trying to decide whether he'd actually hit send. And Meghan's circle? They weren't waiting anymore. They were preparing. For damage. For betrayal. For war. And somewhere in that tight-knit ring of advisors and allies was a snake. Someone who saw the draft. Someone who leaked it. Someone who played both sides. Meghan may never know who. But that night, as she sipped the last of her red wine, closed her laptop, and looked out the window at a world still believing in her perfect life, she whispered to herself, "He won't ruin me." And with that, the fight was officially on. Because Harry wasn't backing down. And Meghan? She wasn't backing out. She was gearing up. And the next move she made would leave even her allies questioning everything they thought they knew about her. They say Buckingham Palace never forgets. And when it comes to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the firm hadn't just remembered. It had been watching, waiting, calculating. Because while the world obsessed over Netflix trailers, podcast cancellations, and Meghan's latest minimalist kitchenware drop, the monarchy was playing a slower, deeper game. One rooted in tradition, optics, and, above all else, preservation. The monarchy, after all, doesn't panic. It prepares. And in quiet corners of Windsor, Clarence House, and yes, even Sandringham, a new plan had begun to take shape. A strategy not to retaliate, but to absorb, to reclaim, to outlast. Because as Harry's marriage began to wobble, royal aides smelled something in the air. Opportunity. Not to humiliate him, not to punish him, but to bring him home. Quietly, carefully, without ever appearing to have extended the olive branch at all. Let's step inside the machine. It started with whispers. Harry was back in touch with Prince Charles. Then came the leaks that he'd reached out to Prince William, once described as estranged beyond repair. And then, Princess Anne entered the picture. A royal workhorse. A woman allergic to drama. And yet, according to palace insiders, she was the one who first said the words. If it's falling apart, we must be ready to catch him, without catching her. Let that land. This wasn't a reunion. It was a rescue, but a selective one. Because while the palace had never truly forgiven Harry's bombshells, the Oprah interview, the memoir, the Netflix docuseries, it still saw him as family. Meghan? She was still seen as the spark that ignited the fire. And though that view may be simplistic, maybe even unfair, it was the one held by most of the royal household. But here's what's fascinating. The strategy wasn't driven by emotion. It was driven by optics. Let's break it down. If Harry and Meghan divorced and the palace appeared cold, they'd be accused of pushing him away again. If they embraced him too publicly, they'd be accused of scheming. So what was the answer? Simple: a slow, silent reintegration. Small steps, strategic moves, and deniability at every level. It began with charity engagements. Harry started appearing